Farmers dealing with devastating losses after a storm. On this week's episode of NTV's Grow, we take a look at that damage. Also, we check out the conditions of the wheat crop as harvest is underway. And later on, we learn more about disaster preparedness plans when it comes to livestock. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. Heartache by hail. It's what farmers are describing that they're seeing and feeling after hail pounded through their crops. NTV's Grow co-host Steve White visited the hardest hit areas.
We rode out the whole thing in the storm, so we knew immediately it wasn't good.
Mike Wilkins was laying irrigation pipe when the hail hit. He won't have to water his crops this year, except for a section of soybeans. They're all gone.
A lot of guys a lot older than I am have never seen anything this widespread this late in the year.
Nearby, Leon Wilson meets with his crop insurance agent.
Done any irrigating at all?
We just started.
Yeah.
Jim Baldonado tells farmers might as well pack the bags and take a vacation because it takes time to file claims, and farmers don't need to think about this.
This is about as bad as we've seen it for a number of years. I mean, there's some soybean fields that you don't even know that are soybean fields.
He says many farmers carry high levels of crop insurance, so look on the bright side. They won't have to irrigate, and they will get a check, especially if they added on hail coverage.
Well, there's some fields out here that we have coverage on. They're going to collect anywhere from, $1,000 to $1,350 an acre because they had really good crop insurance.
Well, I don't know anybody that farms for crop insurance, but there's times when we're tickled to death and we all pay, and sooner or later we usually collect.
Leon says insurance is a necessary cost of business.
I'm not in a position to take a devastation like this.
On the Wilkins farm, they too rely on crop insurance, but they'd much rather deliver to the grain elevator with a crop that until now benefited from recent rains.
Things were looking tremendous. Beans were outstanding, but there's always next year.
It is now estimated that 1,000 animals were killed after those tornadoes that ripped through the Pilger area. Officials in Wayne County say the toll could be 1,000 in a 6-county region, plus hundreds of chickens and other poultry. Producers aren't required to report livestock losses to the government, and businesses such as cattle feeding operations generally don't insure individual animals. So across the country, the USDA is reporting that it's distributed over $1 billion in disaster relief funds under this new farm bill. The agency issued a report this week. They say farmers and ranchers who suffered livestock and grazing losses due to extreme weather over the last 3 years have been quick to take advantage of newly available dollars. Farmers in 40 states have received payments. Planning and preparing for disease that could wipe out Nebraska's #1 industry. Some areas of livestock are more prepared than others. NTV's Sarah Kirkley brings you the details.
Nebraska's state veterinarian says his office is dealing with some type of disease issue weekly, if not daily. But it's one that can't be contained as easily that one group is preparing for this week.
Veterinarians are getting used to checking in and out the same way emergency responders do after a tornado.
The incident management structure is the same.
Except this group is preparing for the catastrophic spread of livestock disease.
An outbreak could spread very rapidly.
Members of the Livestock Emergency Disease Response System, or leaders, have been meeting in Nebraska for 13 years. But it's only been in the last few that producers in the state's dairy and pork industries have adopted secure supply plans. The idea is to get procedure in place now so food can make it to your table, even with an outbreak in the area.
These are radical new plans that have been put in place just the last few years. Prior to these changes in thinking, all we could do before was quarantine these premises, and for the most part, those products could not be used or put into consumption or production, and it would force those businesses out of business, unfortunately.
But one of the state's largest egg industries doesn't have a secure supply plan.
Beef industry has not yet come to the table with anything, but I anticipate that it won't be very long before they do have some kind of a plan in place.
Hughes says these kinds of plans are especially important here in the Husker State.
Because agriculture, and particularly livestock production is so huge in our state, we need to do everything we can to prevent a disease like that from doing such economic devastation.
This group has about 180 members that could respond in the case of a livestock disease emergency, but they're hoping more veterinarians will join their ranks.
Corn and soybean growers, they stand in support of expanding livestock in the state. As we've covered here in depth on Grow, a recent University of Nebraska study says the state is not reaching its full potential for livestock production. Corn and soybean checkoffs funded the report. The incoming head of Corn Board says that they've realized outside of the beef industry, other states are expanding much more than Nebraska is. The groups issued a statement this week saying it is time to act. A failed grain elevator could cost farmers in Nebraska millions. Here's this report.
Could you tell us what you're talking about in your affidavit?
Farmer after farmer testified Tuesday afternoon as the Nebraska Public Services Commission held a hearing to gather more information on claims sought against Pierce Elevator Incorporated. In March, the company was forced to close due to its lost line of operating credit. With that said, roughly 200 farmers are seeking claims, totaling more than $9 million.
This is the biggest one in terms of number of farmers involved and the dollar of claims filed, largest I've ever seen.
The commission says the way farmers and others will be paid back centers on the way grain was handled at the elevator. The first, a warehouse license, meaning farmers paid the elevator to store their grain until they were ready to sell. The other, a grain dealer license. That's when the elevator picked up a farmer's grain and delivered it to a third party. This is what John Fecht, director of grain for the commission, says Tuesday's session focused on.
On grain dealer claims, there would have had to been a demand for payment within the 30 days prior to the closing on March 4th, and any activity, any grain movement prior to that had to be within the last day of the contract, had to be within that 30 days.
Fecht says the commission has already sold hundreds of thousands of bushels of corn previously stored at the Pierce elevator. A significantly less amount of soybeans is in the process of being sold. Fall is the earliest farmers will be notified of their valid claims. After that order, they have 30 days to appeal it in an appeals court. In Pierce, Nebraska, Diana Johnson, ABC 9 News.
The Kansas wheat harvest may be one of the worst on record. Experts say that decrease in wheat does not just hurt Kansans. The United States Department of Agriculture predicts Kansas will harvest 244 million bushels of wheat this year, the worst harvest since 1989. Kansas State University climatologist says the bad harvest reaches across the country. Drought leads to less hay production, meaning fewer cattle. That turns into fewer meat products on the shelf and higher prices, also affecting the economy.
So if the wheat farmer has a very low production and has a very low income, he's not going to go out and buy the machine upgrades that he might have otherwise. That means there's going to be less money floating around in the community being used and turned over many times. So that's going to have a dragging effect on the entire economy.
Knapp also says rain came too late to help out the wheat production. Though you can still feel the effects of the drought. Here in Nebraska, farmers are hoping for better results when it comes to wheat harvest here. NTV's Grow's co-host Steve White brings you this story.
Amber waves of grain. Semi-loads fill up as winter wheat harvest gets underway in Nebraska.
And a lot of guys are just starting to get rolling here this week, and I'd say you'll see a lot of wheat come out this week and into the first part of next week.
Lance Atwater says it looks like a pretty typical crop.
And I'd say it's about average.
And after 2 years of drought, farmers will take average. To get a sense of how bad things were, the USDA figures harvested acres to be up 24% from last year. That's a big jump just to get back to a normal year. Some farmers have taken a hit this year from severe weather, but otherwise have received timely rain.
We've been pretty fortunate that we've missed most of the hail. We did have a couple fields get hit, but overall we've been lucky just to catch the rain.
After the drought, Lance says crop rotation was something they thought about, so they planted winter wheat last September to harvest now and plant another crop next spring.
It gives the ground kind of a break, and you give it a longer period between the crops, so you're extending between your corn and wheat. You have a few more months in there, and just allows the ground to collect more moisture. And
The Atwaters raise corn and beans as well and are getting ready to turn the water on.
You know, last year we were irrigating in June. This year we're just starting up here after the 4th. So it's good for the groundwater. It's allowing farmers to kind of have a little break in there before we really hit it hard if it gets dry.
State leaders tell students that there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to careers, and it all starts on the farm. It's the Nebraska Agricultural Youth Institute, or NAYI. It's the longest running event of its kind, and this year has the largest group of delegates ever.
Well, we're all from farm families and farm communities, so we all have something in common, and everybody's so friendly that it's just hard not to have fun.
I enjoy meeting new people and just the friends I make and the things I learn about people and how to interact with people.
They hear from leaders in agriculture along with the governor, and those state officials tell these students they don't have to move to a big city if they want to work for the big players in agriculture and business. And you get a chance to hear from one of the state leaders that are trying to influence these kids. Coming up after the break, we also have your grow forecast. And check out the Hall County Fair right now. We'll be back.